Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Elevating Trust and Legitimacy for Prosecutors webinar. My name is Eric Landon, and I'm a program manager at the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. The APA is a private, not-for-profit located in Washington, D.C., serving prosecutors as well as their law enforcement and community partners. Thank you for joining this webinar about procedural justice in prosecutor offices. Points of view or opinions in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. Just some quick housekeeping before we do introductions. If you have a question for the presenter, please use the question and answers widget at the bottom of your screen. We will hold the questions until the end of the presentations, at which time our presenter will address them. If you're having any technical difficulties or questions such as audio or video issues, please pop into the chat box, also typically found at the bottom of your screen, and let us know. One of us will assist you with any sound or quality issues that you may be encountering. On this call, we have a few different people presenting. We will have the entire ETL team, which is the APA, the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, LaGratta Consulting, the Yale Justice Collaborative, and Salt Lake District Attorney's Office, St. Paul City Attorney's Office, and the Columbia City Attorney's Office. So at this time, I will hand over to Emily and Caroline.
Great, thanks so much. Emily LaGratta here. I run a small consulting practice that's primarily focused on the topic of procedural justice. So I've spent the past 15 years or so working with courts and a range of other justice agencies from probation to prisons to think about how to leverage this research to build public trust, but also advance other agency goals and to essentially be more impactful. So it's been a complete delight to get to work with all of these partners, including our three trailblazing partner offices. And so before we continue, I'll just pass it over to Caroline to introduce herself, and we're going to be providing an overview for you about the concept and how the project kind of kicked off.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Nobo. I'm the executive director at the Justice Collaboratory, not the collaborative. That is just an important note there. And we are a social science research center embedded within Yale Law School. We are very interested in sort of these theoretical ideas around the popular legitimacy of the criminal legal system and how we can build sort of broad conceptions of safety that have to do with trust and fairness and well-being and community prosecutor interactions. We'll go through this a little bit, but the collaboratory was founded by Tom Tyler and Tracy Mears, who are really known as sort of the trailblazers when it comes to procedural justice and policing. And then over the years have been really dedicated to expanding this theoretical framework to an elevating trust and legitimacy model for prosecutor offices. And then, I often joke that I'm sort of the token non-lawyer in the room because I am a social scientist. So I'll try and keep my nerdy musings to a limit as we talk. So thanks.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to share my screen here. Let me get it launched here. So we just have a few slides, hopefully, that'll help kind of drive home some of the just framing issues that Caroline and I wanted to cover. So, I mean, I think if you're here, obviously you've been thinking a lot about public trust and confidence. There's been some opportunities to explore this, I think, specifically within the kind of prosecutor field. I know NDAA also, like APA's investment in this topic, had a session recently at one of their annual conferences on the topic. And in that, I had an opportunity to ask prosecutors, how do we want the public to describe us? And I love asking that of really anyone in our field, because the answers are almost always the same, with fairness being top of the list. So there's this word cloud here. So fairness was the top result that these prosecutors chimed in. And so it just gives us this sort of reminder that this is this inherent value in the field, and therefore a really good starting place to think about, how can we make sure that the practices, both internally, that we're using with staff, but also externally that we're using with participants, the accused, victims, witnesses, other members of the public, how can we make sure that that fairness value is actually pulled through, every practice, or as many practices of the office as possible. And thankfully, we have this research basis for it, right? I think we all have an intuitive sense of fairness, but thanks to Caroline's shop, we know a lot of the science behind what fairness looks like and feels like to people. And so this project was really grounded in that science and that framework. And so we've used it to come up with a range of practices. So Caroline's going to walk us through some of that framework, and then we're going to go through, we'll highlight a few examples before we get to the awesome pilot sites themselves. But take it away, Caroline.
Great. You can go to the next slide. Okay. Okay, so we're going to work with this theoretical framework people most often know as procedural justice. Maybe you've heard it called procedural fairness, but really what we're talking about is the theory of legitimacy, right? Which is that people interacting with the criminal legal system view authority as legitimate, and that means they're more willing to comply or cooperate with prosecutors, with legal law, with rules. So why do we want legitimacy? How do we get to having legitimate actors? We really do that through building trust, right? So it's sort of looking at the idea of what are my goals, and can my goal as a prosecutor, as an office, as a criminal legal actor, can my goal be trust? And if my goal is trust, I need to do these 4 things to get there. So when we think about justice, we often, Emily and I, talk about that justice is not just the outcome, but it's the process, right? So really what we're talking about here is the process that gets you to the outcome. The 4 tenets are neutrality. So our decisions unbiased and guided by transparent reasoning. This is also sometimes the transparency bucket you'll hear us talk a lot about with procedural justice. Respect. So are people treated with respect and dignity? Voice. Is everyone given a chance to tell their side of the story? And trustworthiness, meaning decision makers convey trustworthy motives about those impacted by their decisions. Okay, so again, the goal is trust, the goal is legitimacy, and this is the framework, the tools, the theoretical grounding that gets us there by a process that embodies these 4 tenets. So our next slide. So let's just talk about the quick history, because, one of my other jokes that I make all the time is that it's not rocket science, but it is science. And I think that is really comforting for people to hear and to know that, like, you can take this model and you can feel really confident that there's just like decades of literature, decades of practitioners using this and have seen results that last longitudinally, that start from management all the way down to support staff to, again, the community of accused victims. And so how we know this is like, we are sort of like here in the middle, but this started with early research around social psychology of organizational behavior, big companies, the way internally people are working and how they're externally matching these values to their consumers. Tom Tyler and Tracy meet, some melding of the minds. They start applying this to policing and in courts. This is a big turning point because we realize that we don't have to sacrifice public safety to get procedural justice. These 2 things can go hand in hand. There's the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice, which was this Obama era initiative that listed procedural justice as the #1 pillar for getting there. And then we started to do some initial resources with prosecutors. Emily's done probation and parole. We even did a project in a prison. And we really are committed to taking this framework, this trust and legitimacy framework, and applying it to a bunch of different settings. So how we do this is we ask questions like, how do citizens and litigants conceptualize fairness and trust? We say, what practices impact those perceptions? How do we get staff to implement these practices, the buy-in part of it? And then sort of how should these practices vary by role? Because in a large prosecutor office, there's a lot of difference among how people are interacting and how they can apply these tenets to get the results that we want. You are here. Yes. So I love this slide. Emily put this slide together, I think years ago now, which is, what is trust building? It's these 4 tenets. And what is trust building not? Often one of the critiques of procedural justice is sort of like, you're just telling me to be polite. Like you want me to say, sir, ma'am. We want people to feel good. It's not just about being polite. We want you to do that. We want you to treat people with respectful language and be present in interactions. There's no reason in feeling good about making an investment in your interactions with the community. But it's also not just this one-time isolated training, right? Though there is measurable effects from even just a one-time training, but we want to see is what these 3 offices did, which was a multi-year commitment to not only understanding the theory, but to engaging, to measuring, to literally changing internal policies over time, and then applying the framework moving forward. So it is much more than sort of being polite or just doing an 8-hour training. We know this through a lot of research and partnership with multiple partners. I think I'll hand it to you, Em.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. So we hope we've teed up for you that when this project started, we were really doing something for the first time, which was asking offices to volunteer to make this multi-year commitment into a topic in a way that prosecutors really hadn't done in a concerted way before. And we were overwhelmed by the interest, the quality of the offices. We had, I think, nearly 30 offices apply from around the country. I see in the participant list, we have some of them here. So it was an incredibly hard decision, but we had these 3 great offices who you'll hear from today, who kind of rose to the top in their commitment to not just do the work, but do the hard work, right? Which is really examining challenges. Topics like this, there's always room for improvement, but that examination and reflection can be really uncomfortable, frankly, especially amidst all the other, pressures and things going on in prosecutors' offices the past 3 years. With morale being low, turnover being high, et cetera. It was all within that context. And so what we'll kind of go into now is just how important it was to have these sort of dual components of the project, both an inward look at how internal legitimacy can be improved. How can leadership display more just authority by employing these practices and aim to improve staff satisfaction, reduce staff stress, things like that. And how that then, of course, feeds into, in the form of buy-in, the support that is needed to actually make these external changes. Any of those sort of public-facing efforts to employ those 4 elements with the range of public that staff come into contact with. And by staff, we, of course, mean lawyers and non-lawyers. So that was a really key feature of the project, to make sure that these offices were ensuring that this was not just a lawyer effort, but that there would be ways for the non-lawyer voices, which are so critical, them and their work, to be brought into this, because so often they also are, the face of the office to the public. So we did this through, we had a teams. You're going to meet some of the team members in a moment. Really high-level folks who showed up very frequently to meetings we convened, helped us put together a range of additional workshops, so that we really had lots of different ways that we were hearing from staff. We would go on site. We had numerous online workshops to engage folks. We surveyed the staff, I think at least twice in each office, to get their insights, but also provide a measure that we could start to look at how things are shifting over time. So this was a significant undertaking. And so, if I haven't done it enough already, just wanted to really applaud the efforts of the folks on the call and their whole teams for taking this on. So we wanted to show just a couple of examples of some of the things, both like activities, process things that were part of the project, but also that have some substantive findings as well. And so very similar questions were asked across the sites. Which site it is not important because we actually saw a lot of similarities across the 3 sites. So Sasha, I know I'm running over time, but just give me like 2 more minutes and then we'll be passing it off to the next. So internal legitimacy. So we wanted to really understand kind of how do staff think about the work they do and how is that connected to legitimacy theory. So interestingly, in one of the sites, we actually asked people, there was a, each of the offices had some kind of articulated mission statement, values, etc. And so we asked, do you know what those values are? And kind of remarkably, 75% of the staff said that they do. They knew what they were. But then when we sort of quizzed them on it, only 20% could give the right answer. So we noticed, and again, across offices, that there was this sort of struggle, that there were lots of things that they were trying to deliver on. None of these values were wrong, of course. They're all things that make up that word cloud that I showed on the first slide. But in terms of how they're prioritizing those values and connecting it to practice, there seemed to be a disconnect that this theory could really help with. We also wanted to examine, as I mentioned, kind of what is the relationship between organizational justice or internal procedural justice and stress, right? If we could figure out a way to help prosecutors feel less stressed, we knew that that would be a contribution. And lo and behold, as with other studies, we see that in fact, perceptions of internal procedural justice are correlated with stress. So the more that, and you'll hear examples in a minute, the more we can help to have that internal legitimacy, we may be working towards this goal of having staff that are also experiencing less stress. And then last but not least, we have done some interesting work around trying to capture the voices of participants. And so among those, we were able to conduct victim surveys in the sites, exploring not just what victims thought about their experience, right, along procedural justice lines, but also comparing or examining, is there a disconnect between what victims are experiencing and what staff assume that victims are experiencing, and even break it down based on lawyer and non-lawyer interactions. So what you're looking at here is essentially the blue lines are prosecutor perspectives or non-lawyer perspectives on the right graph, and the green ones are the victims. So in some cases, the victims are actually giving a higher rating than the staff themselves are kind of self-assessing at, which is interesting. But in other areas, especially, we noticed consistently across groups with the element of transparency, victims were rating that lower than what staff are perceiving. And so things like this, of course, not only give voice to victims, so just by asking, they're making a difference, but they can then use this data to show we really need to double down on our transparency efforts, which are not simple in a prosecutor's office, but still worthy of exploration. So Caroline, I'll let you have the last word before we pass it off, but otherwise I want to keep to our time as best we can.
No, I think you said it all. And again, just a big thank you to the sites and their commitment to this work over the past couple of years.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for that overview. I especially appreciate the contextualizing of this is science and it's not just theory that we're applying, and then the demonstration of the data behind it is really excellent to see. So to back up, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sasha Beatty. I'm senior counsel with APA. I have the pleasure of facilitating the next sort of site-specific discussions that we're going to have. And so to begin, we're going to turn to the project site leadership within each of the 3 offices we worked with on this project. And they'll introduce themselves fully in a bit, but we are privileged to be joined by Salt Lake County District Attorney Sim Gill, St. Paul City Attorney Lindsay Olson, and Columbus City Attorney Zach Klein, who are here with their respective teams to discuss the implementations and the lessons learned during their participation with the Procedural Justice ETL project. So first, I would love for our DA and city attorneys to kind of give us the 30,000-foot views of their offices and kind of lay the groundwork for us a bit. to tee that up for their teams in a moment. So I'm going to actually start with Sim, with you, if you don't mind. I think we would all kind of love to hear briefly about what your office's goals were in participating with this project, and maybe more specifically how messaging and improving relationships with the public kind of came into that conversation and impacted the progress.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and it's a privilege to be here and to reconnect with everybody again. I think Emily captured that and early on. For us, it was really to look at those two components. One was, we looked at ourselves and we wanted to see, can we take a critical look at ourselves in the service of our community, and were we meeting those objectives and were we serving our community? We certainly had a perception of what that meant for us, but were we actually doing, and could we do it in a sort of a sustainable, methodical way to achieve that outcome beyond just feeling good or anecdotally amongst ourselves? So there was that external desire to reach that. And then, of course, simultaneously, the most important thing for me to take away from it was that we can't meet that external message if we are not being consistent internally. And that meant our support staff, it meant our non-lawyer positions, it meant the totality of all our support that we relied upon. And that also gave us insight into, again, were we giving voice to those individuals? What did they mean about their quality of their life and work-life balance when we talk about stress? How are we communicating and creating the conditions for them to feel connected to what we thought was our mission objective as well? So there was this symbiotic relationship with the external component and how it was symbiotically connected in a necessary way to our internal component as well. So that was really the balance that we were trying to strike. And for us, I'll take a second, and I know my colleagues will talk about some of the other stuff that they did. But in terms of improving that relationship with the public, we think about it often as prosecution offices, is that, that's our media time, right? Then when we have that media opportunity, but those may come and go, and we can engage and lean into that depending on our office. But for us, what it meant was, how do we really start that communication with the community? Certainly when we went through it, we certainly had convenings with stakeholders. And one of the byproducts of which we have now implemented now is that I have taken the effort to reach out to every community council. We have a large county, and we are reaching out personally through this year, started to personally go out and meet with every community council to explain to them who we are, how we represent them, and to have this initial conversation. And then we will be setting up a reconvening with every community council as part of a community academy to go more in detail. So they're excited that we are actually meeting them out in that space, and they're looking forward to coming back and reconvening as a summit, as a organization of community participants for the first time that an elected has reached out to them in this direct fashion. Another takeaway that we took away was that there are sometimes communities that aren't often given that voice and that are forgotten, and that may be episodically approached too. So another example of that lesson that we learned for that outreach is, for example, to reach out to all our indigenous communities. Most people may not realize that the Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City area leads the nation in 8th in the nation in missing and murdered women, indigenous women. So we started to look at that, and we have now reached out, and we're reaching out to our indigenous communities where they are, and we're trying to create a bilateral relationship about their needs and how we can serve them. And we will be setting up a convening of all our indigenous nations, tribes to come together as a part of that community outreach. And thirdly, in terms of that community outreach, we looked at a specific issue, the issue of hate crimes, and working with our partners against hate, a multi-stakeholder coalition of people coming together, with our office playing a critical role within that. And how can we work with different diverse communities, ethnic communities, LGBTQ communities, refugee communities, and how do we give a voice to them as a public institution prosecution and what role we can play. And I mentioned all of these things are the things that were our takeaways from this experience that we had coming together. I know that my colleagues will talk a little bit more about some of the internal part of it, but I just wanted to highlight that as part of our experience and the experience that we had and the insight that we learned and the work that we're doing to reach those communities.
Thank you so much, Sim, for teeing that up. I think we're going to be able to expand on that in a little bit. So very exciting to hear. Lindsay, turning it over to you next to kind of tee things up for your group and expand on later in the webinar. What goals did your office have going into this? And it would be great if you could expand a little bit more on your internal stakeholder lens a little bit and that sort of interstitching that with the tenets of procedural justice.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks for having me. We appreciate being a part of this project and here today with everyone. I was immediately interested in this project, and partly because I had worked with Emily in the past. When I came in, we reformulated our mission and values for the office and really spent a lot of time on what that meant for us and how we could work with our staff to connect them to the work and to move in a direction of alternatives to traditional prosecution and to really make those more foundational part of the work that was happening within our office in the areas that we have jurisdiction in. And so we had just begun that work when I came in, and I met Emily when she was still working for Center for Court Innovation out in New York City. So when I saw this project, I just was instantly intrigued, and I really felt like it was an opportunity for us to do this work, examining what we're doing as we're doing it. And so, which I think is a really unique opportunity, because a lot of times you fall in on a program that someone else developed or what's happening in your district. And we were building several new things. And I think similar to what Jeff was saying, you know, our mindset was, this is a great opportunity to test our assumptions. And I think all of us get into these areas where, you know, we have a lens on what we do within this giant system, right? And it's only one perspective. And this is an opportunity for us to test that and really ensure that what we think, you know, we're doing is working. And because it doesn't matter so much, you know, we can say, hey, we built this program and plant the flag for a win, when we have really no idea how it's affecting victims or affecting the community or affecting those that experience the process. And so I thought this was just a phenomenal opportunity to be able to do that. And so as we're building it, you know, go back and say, okay, we're getting this feedback, this is working, this isn't. And I think, you know, along those lines, parallel, we also went about a really deliberate process to revamp, you know, how we're coming into court, to really focus on individualized justice, to train our prosecutors to that, and really approach this. It was a change for folks. Some were really excited to embrace it, and others were like, I don't know, what is this, right? And when Jessica McConaughey, who's also on here, she's my deputy for the criminal division, when she and I talked about this, and her predecessor talked about this, the important thing that we wanted was to have a dialogue with our staff, with the prosecutors, with the staff, so that we're not telling them, hey, here's what we're going to start doing, and we need you to just do that. I think it's important to recognize that we have, you know, really high performing staffs of folks that are trained to analyze things, right? That's what we do. And so to ask our staff to accept something because we've made a decision rather than approach it as a dialogue doesn't feel right. And so we really wanted people to think about what procedural justice was, what they thought it looked like for them, what they thought their role was, what steward of justice meant for them, all these things. And so they can come along with us in the work. And so this was an opportunity to do that as well. And again, sort of see where we're at with staff, and have, you know, the APA come in and do surveys, not just with our staff, but also with partners. You know, how does the bench see this? How do city elected leaders see what we're doing and the effects of that with the community? So I don't, you know, as far as perceived gaps that I wanted to fix, I thought a lot about this in preparation to talk today. And what I came to is I really, more than anything, wanted to be open to what the work was telling us, and not focus so much on what our assumptions might be about what we needed to fix or work on. So I think we were more excited. You know, we had built a couple of programs in the restorative justice realm. Our Ethos program, which does restorative justice circles, and then a brand new program that does restorative justice for gun crimes that are within our jurisdiction. And it's been amazing to have this work happening at the same time so that we can really continue to evaluate ourselves as we're building those critical programs. So that's why we came to this program, and it's been an amazing journey. So thank you for having us here today.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And I think it's you hit on something that I know that your team is going to touch on, but I just want to flag for the audience, which is, you know, thinking three-dimensionally and telegraphing changes internally without communicating early and often and inviting feedback, changes to policy or to programming, it's not going to be as successful. So I think that that's a really sort of important aspect of procedural justice that we were able to work with your office on. So Zach, we're gonna kick it over to you next to kind of wrap things up for this portion of the panel. But we would love to hear from you about, you know, Columbus's efforts and goals and what your office wanted to accomplish, and specifically if you could maybe talk more about your external stakeholder relationships and how that was affected.
Sure, I'd love to. And first, let me recognize and thank the great work the APA does, that Emily does, that the Yale Justice Collaboratory does under Caroline's leadership. As well as my friends from Salt Lake City and St. Paul to be in this cohort of 3. We are grateful to join you all because of just how important I think this topic is. I mean, I will say, you know, crime generally and the perceptions and realities of crime and violence across the United States, I think, is on everyone's mind. Certainly here in Columbus, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably true in Salt Lake City and St. Paul as well as all the attendees. And I think it's so important that when we're looking to build legitimacy and trust in the criminal justice system, and then us as prosecutors, in a lot of ways, the gatekeepers to that system, that on the one hand, you have doing the right thing in fairness, and then the other hand, our duties that we obviously want to keep our community safe, and that there are sometimes through reality or perception that there's a belief that, well, this particular office is really fair and just, but man, crime's through the roof. I'm not sure how good of a job they're doing. Or the opposite, that man, like, I feel like they're really dropping the hammer and doing the right thing, but I'm not sure how fair they are. You know, so-and-so got this sentence, you know, it's disproportionate. I think in an ideal world, and what was so great about this particular exercise is that in an ideal world, there's 100% overlap of doing the right thing and keeping your community safe. And that is a balance of legitimacy through diversion programs and explaining like why that's still accountability and you're not really letting anyone off the hook, and you have success rates to show that your community is safe because of certain programs. And on the flip side, understanding there are violent people out there that deserve jail time and prison time. And it's balancing those, but at the center of it is the legitimacy and the trust in the community. It's the community believing that the system that they're participating in, whether it's a victim, whether it's a witness to a crime, or whether it's just a constituent that wants to raise their family in a nice, safe neighborhood, but the legitimacy and trust in our particular criminal justice system is tantamount to be successful in all those things. And that's why I was so interested and eager to be selected in Columbus to elevate Columbus's role in our own community, of how we can build legitimacy and trust across the board. And I know specifically you mentioned, Sasha, the external stakeholders. And we have many faith community. We have neighborhood leaders, we have elected officials, we certainly have other prosecutor offices that we interact with, whether it's, in Columbus, we do all the misdemeanor crimes. We still have the county prosecutor that does felonies and juveniles. We have the U.S. Attorney's Office. Having legitimacy and faith across the collaboratory efforts of other prosecutors, but we also have our own law enforcement agencies. And I know a lot of cities have experienced strife in communications and perception with law enforcement and rebuilding those bridges over the past couple of years. And Columbus certainly wasn't immune to that. And one thing that particularly I learned, just focusing on police, I know Melanie Tobias, who runs my criminal division, will speak in a lot more detail. And by the way, Melanie's amazing, and I appreciate all the work that Melanie has done, is the notion that we communicated initially with kind of the top brass of police, as we tried to implement significant changes within the office, but also significant changes as the lawyer to the police. And that was a big mistake. Not bringing in the rank and file to buy into the changes that we sought, to get their buy-in early, was a lesson learned, and I learned it loud and clear. That was a helpful exercise that I think was brought to light through the APA's effort in this legitimacy and trust exercise. And so now we attend roll calls on a regular basis, hearing from the rank and file of the changes that they think they need to be made. And then we, in a collaborative partnership effort, are able to implement those changes. And it's really the same across the faith community as well across neighborhood groups, and sending lawyers out into our area commissions, our block watches, to listen so that we can have a team approach effort to rebuild and continue to build faith in the criminal justice system in my own community. So I'll stop there, but I do just want to end where I started, and just thank all the participants, the funders that made this happen, because it was a worthwhile exercise that I think we all learned a lot on.
Yes, thank you so much, Zach. And I don't think we could have stated any better why it's so important to really create and or build on the transparency and the relationships that you have with your community, whatever the community looks like, right? It could be law enforcement, it could be the general public, it can also be, defendants, the accused as well. And that really just does create that buy-in and that trust. And that's exactly why we came out to your offices. So thank you so much for that. So thank you again to site leadership. I think we're gonna shift gears a little bit and kind of go more in depth with each of the sites to see their application of the procedural justice tenets, and discuss a little bit more about lessons learned and next steps. So we'll start off with Salt Lake.
You can still see me, right?
Yes.
I just pulled the cable out of the thing and turned off the whole deal. Hi, I'm Jeff Hall. I'm here with Anna Rossi, who's here. I'll pull this out right there. So Anna and I are chief deputies in the Justice Division. We work for SIM in Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office. And there we are. There we are. So the two things that came to my mind about building trust, legitimacy, and applying a lot of the lessons that we learned as we collaborated with APA and with Yale and with Emily LaGratta, we had a chance, I think, to put them to use recently in a reorganization that we've done. It's probably the biggest structural reorganization we've done in the office, certainly in this administration. And we've had moves in the past. We've had reassignments, and the way we in administration have approached those, it was different this time around with the restructure of the office. And some of the key differences were principles that we talked about as we worked with ETL, and I personally noticed a different result, a different feel in the atmosphere of the office, is the way the changes were received, the way we went about it, the decisions that we made. And really what was different this time around was similar to kind of some of Zach's comments about including more people earlier on at all levels of the organization. Having more of a collaborative conversation with people. Previously, we administration would make some decisions. We would announce it then to the affected people. Our employees, our members, they knew that we were scheming something. They knew that we were making some changes and making moves. They didn't know quite what they were, and they knew that it would happen annually. So around October, November, an anxiety would start to permeate through the office because they knew something was going to happen to their assignments, but they weren't quite sure what. And sometimes we weren't always able to execute in January. So sometimes this would linger through, February. But this time around, as we approached the reorganization, the changes, we included really all levels of management in the discussion about what we were trying to do. But we also got their input about how we were going to go about this. And there were a lot of constructive changes that were suggested. And then just including them in the collaboration and the discussion, and then involving everybody in the office at a much earlier stage than we've done before, in a much more collaborative way. It was much more of a conversation. And I just didn't perceive the kind of anxiety that we've had in the past. There was there were still some questions that were raised, and there was a couple of concerns which you would expect as part of an organic process. But it seemed like our efforts and our energy, we were able to devote that much more to the work than trying to manage expectations or anxieties or deal with some collateral issues. That internally, I think, was brought about as a result of a lot of work with ETL, and then a lot of work internally. And Anna, who's here next to me, has really been at the forefront of leading this evolution, this development to adopt ETL principles with a variety of ways, one of which is just being explicit about the culture that we wanted to create and foster and develop in the office, and what are our values and what is important to us. And at the beginning of every agenda, which Anna creates and takes the minutes and then circulates the minutes, and we create a new agenda for these leadership meetings, the beginning of every one of these is a cultural discussion, is a discussion about what is the culture of the office and where do we want it to go and how can we implement that. That was something that was developed as a result of our collaboration with ETL. Giving voice to those values. What kind of a culture do we want here? And it's one example, I think, of a lot of things that we've done internally, and it really has changed the atmosphere in the office. Extending to people the respect in advance, and asking them, of course, to respect boundaries and confidences and be methodical in how we share this information. It certainly wasn't a free-for-all where we just threw a bunch of information out at everybody. Neither was it, though. It wasn't siloed. It wasn't really guarded, and it was a conversation. Externally, Sim referred to a much more aggressive effort to reach out to our stakeholders in the county, law enforcement, community councils. He's talked to us specifically about other community partners, mayors, municipal councils, and in a very organized effort for us to take our message. And it just occurred to me as we're going through the CTL process that we really occupy a space here in the county in the criminal justice system. I mean, we ought to be setting the example and really setting the tone and establishing culture and what are our values. And it's not just about a win or a conviction, but there's more to it in the criminal justice system, especially as we're trying to really curate trust and legitimacy with community members, some of whom are not excited about prosecution, law enforcement, criminal justice issues. We had a change in personnel where we had one person filling a role with our comms person, media, and community outreach. When he left to go pursue other opportunities, we hired two people to fill that role, and so now we have a person who plans SIM's outreach and his schedule and does the coordination and really organizes it and puts it all into motion. My takeaway from these two lessons was you can you can affect change through a lot of hard work internally. If you are disciplined and you are specific and you articulate, you give voice to the kinds of values that you want to promote and the kind of culture that you want to aspire to, you can do that with a lot of hard work. And sometimes you have to spend the money to do it too. Like we had to hire another person to get this done. A newsletter was something that we heard about from ETL, one of the APA partners in his role as the elected official in Portland, put together this massive annual report and a newspaper and all of this material that went out to, and we said, we want to do that too. But as we looked at each other, we're like, I don't have the time, Anna doesn't have the time, Sim doesn't have the time to do that. And so we had to spend a little bit of money. By that, I just sort of mean labor hours, of dedicating a person to get that done, because that was something important to us. But the newsletter was not going to write itself. So we had to dedicate a person to that. You don't always have to spend money on every change that you want to implement. You can do it with hard work, and you can do it with determined, deliberative, focused effort. And then there's some times where you also have to spend some resources and to actually, spend some capital to get the thing done.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
I'm so sorry to cut you guys off because I feel like we're just getting into the meat of it. And there's so much to say. And but I do want to make sure that our other two sites do get an opportunity to take the floor. So I think that's just thank you so much, Jeff and Anna, for your observations. I'm going to turn it over to St. Paul next. So Jonica, do you mind throwing up your slides and telling us a little bit about the road so far and where you're headed?
Yes, great. Thank you, Sasha. And thank you, Eric, for running the slides for me. My name is Jonica Carr, and I am a prosecutor with the St. Paul City Attorney's Office. And I was a part of this ET&L project at our office, and I'm excited to talk with the group today on some of the practices and processes and even programs that we have implemented at our office or expanded as a part of this ET&L work. So we were asked to talk about an internal and external practice that we have implemented and some future goals that our offices have. So you can go to the first slide, Eric. Okay, so I wanted to highlight this practice. It's an internal and an external practice. It's our initial contact letter to victims. I wanted to highlight this because it is a tangible outcome for our office. It's an internal process that we changed that does impact external individuals, right? Namely victims of crime. This was actually born from one of the ET&L workshops that was held with the ET&L group and our office's victim witness staff. And kind of based on those conversations that were held within that workshop, one of our victim witness staff, Yua, I think she's watching right now, I'm going to give her a shout out. She identified an area that we could improve internally, proposed the improvement to her colleagues and management, who gave her voice, right, and changed this process. And that was this letter, the victim first letter, or the initial letter that our office sends to identified crime victims. It was updating the actual letter, which I kind of showed you what the first letter looked like to what the letter is like now, and also kind of some of the things that we send out to identified victims of crime. The updates were sending out a crime victim brochure with this initial letter, clarifying their attendance, right? That it's not required at the first appearance, but it's welcomed, what that hearing is, what their role would be at that hearing, which really is just observing. We included information about restitution right up front. We didn't do that in the past. We also included a restitution brochure. We also do plan to kind of update this letter more. We're going to include some information about if victims of crime do want to attend that first appearance and kind of what that looks like, particularly for victims of domestic violence. Some other internal practices that we have incorporated are standardizing the terms we used in the courtroom, mainly at arraignments right now. So, right, identifying myself as Jonica Carr with the city of St. Paul versus with the state of Minnesota. Calling defendants by their last name as opposed to defendant, offender, right? Kind of giving them the respect that they also deserve in the courtroom. And sorry if I'm going fast. I think we're really being conscious of time. So I wanted to highlight that letter. You can go to the next slide, Eric. where I talk about an external practice. And that was the creation of a stipulated expungement initiative, a pilot program in our office. Really proud of this program that we were able to roll out just last month. This program serves and we partnered directly with the community on this pilot, specifically a local legal defense nonprofit, and also obviously those with criminal convictions. And hopefully we're beginning to build trust with these two groups of people, right? So this pilot actually started when the executive director of that criminal defense nonprofit, who we are in the courtroom with often, he let our office know that they were at this local shelter weekly. That is kind of a big, it's a big shelter in our local community. And they were there weekly to offer their free legal services to the residents. And one of the main questions or topics that came up in those conversations that he had with the residents of the shelter related to expungement of these individuals' lower level criminal convictions. And so he presented it to our office as this: what is your appetite for doing something relating to stipulating to expungements? Pursuant to statute in Minnesota, prosecutors can actually stipulate to the sealing of a criminal record without the filing of a petition. So it's, you know, a pretty cool statute that we have that we're able to do that. And so we created this pilot program in partnership with this legal defense nonprofit. And we included kind of this guidelines document that overviews what the program is in a very concise and simple way. This 2-page application in lieu of the extremely long and burdensome petition that this nonprofit can help their clients at this shelter complete, and a point of contact in our office to submit that document to. Our hope, right, is that this is external transparency and legitimacy. We are open and eager to be part of programs like this and even create programs like this, right? And that we really do want to partner with our community and try to simplify a complicated process, which quite frankly is petitioning for expungement of your criminal record. Quickly, some other kind of external practices that we have implemented in our office. We've created this 1-pager on what our diversion program looks like that we give to defense counsel as well as pro se individuals. We've created standardized scripts that we use in our arraignment courts to explain to the folks in the courtroom, mostly defendants, what out of custody arraignments are, in kind of this simple way, who we are, who is there at our office, what their certain offer means, etc. Next slide is going over our future goals. So areas that we've identified that we would really like to focus on in our office based on this great work that we've done with the ET&L team. First, internal is new hire trainings on this legitimacy framework. So possibly having a staff member from my unit or management discuss these principles with new hires as a part of training and their training schedule. Another thing we're looking at internally is creating this all staff communication. What could regular team updates look like? Could it be a newsletter like Salt Lake County kind of mentioned earlier? An email blast? Can staff submit topics on successes or things to highlight in our office that we could kind of push out monthly? Something we're kind of looking at. Also the creation of a policy manual so that we have kind of all of our office policies in one place, like other manuals that we have. I know that management is currently in the process of creating this document as well, and we've got feedback from our staff that would actually be really helpful. Lastly, an external process and kind of a plug for our gun diversion program. So we actually are looking to expand our current gun diversion program. I really wanted to note this. There is a webinar on this gun diversion program that St. Paul has next week, October 25th at 2 p.m. Central Time, if you're free. We are looking to expand not only the types of charges that we review as part of our gun diversion program, but also the programming that we offer the participants in our gun diversion program. So that is it for me. Again, thank you for having me, and I will kick it off to Columbus.
Thank you so much, Donica. Melanie, take it away. Melanie, I think you're on mute.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. If you could put my slides up, and I have been yelled at many times over my career by court reporters for talking too fast, so I will fly through this without a problem. So our external stakeholders that we worked with, something that Zach touched on when he was speaking to everybody, law enforcement agencies, crime victims, and defendants are the three that we identified that we wanted to implement new processes with and examine how we were interacting with those stakeholders. And this is something that every prosecutor office engages in. To go to the next slide. Crime victims as an external stakeholder, we've got two different kinds of crime victims here in Columbus, in the sense that victims on cases that law enforcement has filed criminal charges already, and so they're active criminal cases, they're already engaged in the court system. And then our office has a rather unique program, we call it our intake unit, and it is the ability for citizens to come directly into the prosecutor's office and file a criminal intake complaint to be evaluated for criminal charges. And so oftentimes these are crime victims that have called the police, they filed a police report, but because it was not an offense that was committed in the presence of an officer, officers don't do anything other than take a report and some basic investigation. They will then refer those individuals to our office. So we come in and screen those complaints. So they're in a slightly different bucket than criminal crime victims that are engaged in the court system already with a filed charge. We were interested in feedback and what was driving satisfaction. So we would go up to the next slide. What's driving satisfaction with these two types of crime victims? And it overlapped. We did a survey with the APA as part of this program of crime victims that were in court already. They surveyed hundreds of them with questions about their interaction with the court and with our staff. And then we set up, again, with the assistance of APA in this program, we set up digital media in our lobby so that anyone coming into their lobby to ask questions, to get referrals, to file that criminal complaint, could answer a survey and give feedback about their experience with our office. And what we learned, and I don't think this was a shock to a lot of us, but it gave real reinforcement that this is actually true, is that a victim and a member of the public, their perception of being listened to is what drove their satisfaction with the court system and with our office in particular. So even if the outcome wasn't what they wanted, if they felt like they were listened to, that they were given accurate information, that they weren't shuttled around to one place or another place or told, sorry, we can't help you. If they felt that they had buy-in in what was going on, they reported satisfaction with the criminal justice system, with the prosecutor's office. Again, separate from whether or not there was a conviction in the case that they were a victim, or if they had criminal charges filed. That didn't drive the outcome. What drove it was, did they feel like they had participation? Did we listen to them? And did they feel like they had a better understanding of why things worked the way they worked when they left the courthouse and our office? Next slide, if you could go down to the one that says law enforcement, Eric, 2 slides away. Another external stakeholder is law enforcement. And again, Zach touched on this. I think we felt like going to the top level brass, the commanders, the chief of police, to get buy-in for policy changes and big ideas that we had was crucial and the primary way to go about doing that. And what we've learned was that it isn't. I mean, obviously you need to get their buy-in ultimately so that they will participate and go along with the change. But if only going to the top brass is that, if that's the only thing you're focused on, you're making an assumption that that agency has trust and legitimacy already built into it, right? The idea is, well, if the police chief says it's going to be a good idea, if the commander says it's going to be a good idea, well, then all of the patrol is going to buy into it and be fine with it because they must trust their leaders. Well, that's not always the case, right? That's a big assumption you're making when you don't engage all the way down to the ground level. And it's something that we really learned a good lesson about here in Columbus, and we're able to use ETL principles with our law enforcement. If we have large scale program changes that we want to make and we want the police to be supportive of it, we need to get the buy-in of the patrol officers. So as part of this program, we did create a gun safety program similar to what Jonica was talking about that St. Paul did. And we made damn sure that we had the buy-in of patrol officers in the creation of the program. What was it going to look like? What were the outcomes? Do they understand that diversion doesn't just mean people getting a slap on the wrist? That there is accountability built in there, and what do they think accountability looks like? So we really tried to get the buy-in of our Columbus Police Department from the ground level up, when we were developing this program. And it's, you know, attending the roll calls like Zach referred to. That is, we are there with the patrol officers all across the city. What are you guys facing? What issues are a problem, are the biggest problem in your precinct? What can we do to help you and support the work that you're doing? That ground level connection is really, really important. And this project reinforced that probably above and beyond anything else. Next slide. Defendants, they're an external stakeholder, right? The system doesn't work without them. They're one of our biggest external stakeholders, particularly when we're looking at diversion programs, and our office has a number of them. Are we communicating clearly with defendants in those programs? Are we being transparent? Do they understand the goal of those programs? And so how we're explaining it to them. The ETL principles were crucial in how we describe them, the brochures we put together, how we advertise those programs to the defendants and to the court and the defense attorneys that are involved. When cases are resolved because of a diversion program, we want to make sure that we're putting on the record and advertising in the courtroom what exactly that entailed, because then that does advertise to the public why diversion is important, that it still is accountability for the defendant, and helps reinforce the idea that diversion is a legitimate pathway to criminal justice. It's non-traditional, but it is absolutely legitimate. And then kind of to touch on something that Jonica was also talking about, we have a new law that was passed in the state of Ohio that allows prosecutors to apply to expunge people's records on their behalf. And it's limited to low-level drug cases. So for our office, that's going to be marijuana offenses. And so we have been, for the past 4 months, engaged in getting a list of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of, approaching 1,000 defendants with marijuana convictions in Columbus. And on behalf of the defendant, we can apply to have their record expunged. We had to put the letter together because we had to notify them that we were doing this. How we used ETL principles. So how do we describe that to the defendant? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? How is this going to help them? That really helped us craft a good message. And I will note, just because we have a lot of prosecutors on this webinar, I presented at a statewide municipal attorney CLE on this topic, and the fact that our office was going to do this, thinking that all these offices are going to embrace it. They're going to want to use our templates and our letters. And the negative feedback from the other prosecutors' offices around the state of Ohio to the fact that we were doing this on behalf of defendants' marijuana convictions, we were really surprised by that. And, you know, in attempting to describe why we thought this was a good idea, obviously the General Assembly thought it was a good idea to have this as an option. They passed laws allowing us to do this. But I just, as a side note, I thought you would be interested in that we received a lot of negative feedback from other prosecutors' offices that were surprised that we were willing to engage in this, and had a lot of trepidation from their perspective as to why we would reach out and help defendants in this manner. Next slide. Internal practices, again, very quickly, we are a big office. We have 100 employees in our criminal division. And Zach is the city attorney, obviously oversees that entire division in addition to our civil unit. And we're housed in 2 completely separate buildings that are about a mile apart. So one of the things we learned throughout this process is that sometimes the staff didn't feel as engaged as they could with Zach as their elected official. So Zach really wanted to make a concerted effort to try different things to make more of a connection with his staff, given that his main office is in a completely separate building. So he started attending our meetings more regularly, and just trying to get more face time on a regular basis, doing everyday things with our staff so that they could feel more connected to him. And then I believe, like St. Paul talked about, internal policies. When we make changes internally, getting staff feedback well in advance is super important. And that is definitely something that we have endeavored to change and implement. Getting feedback, bringing those staff members in to say, hey, this is what we're thinking about. Are we on the right track? What do you think would be a good way to implement this change, versus just announcing from the top down, hey, big changes and here's what it is. Definitely increase staff satisfaction in our office, 100%. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Eric, why don't you close us out? Oh, Eric, you're on mute. Oh, well, in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you all so much for your insights and sharing your knowledge with the attendees today. I know that we had the just tremendous privilege of working with your offices over the past few years, and just seeing the changes and the willingness to engage with the procedural justice model, and how the impacts in your offices as well as externally have just been tremendous to see. And I know that we are going to continue working with you in the next iteration of this project. And so we're just so excited to see where this goes. Thank you all for attending this webinar today. I put my email in the chat. I know that we ran out of time, so we don't have any Q&A, but if you would like to get in touch with any of the panelists on today's discussion, I will put you in touch with them. And this recording will be up on our website and our YouTube channel in a couple of days. So thank you all so much, and take care and have a great rest of your week.